Did you know that we have an agreement with Ukraine from the 90s where the US committed security assurances? Yep, it's called the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. So let me walk it back. Geek out with me. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the US, Russia, and others began talks to decrease the number of nuclear weapons and to add former Soviet countries to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The Soviets had placed nuclear warheads across their land, and so Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan agreed to give up their nuclear weapons and join the Non-Proliferation Treaty in exchange for security assurances. And so agreements with each of these three former Soviet countries are what became this Budapest Memorandum, which was signed in Budapest, Hungary in 1994. Ukraine actually had 1,900 nuclear warheads, which at the time was the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. The agreement specifically says that in exchange for Ukraine giving up these weapons, the US, Russia, and UK are prohibited from threatening or using military force or economic warfare against Ukraine. It says they will, quote, respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine, and will refrain from the threat or use of force against the country. Clearly, Putin forgot about this deal. I didn't forget, I just didn't like it. When negotiating the security assurances, the US told Ukraine that if Russia were to violate the deal, the US would respond, but there were no guarantees of military aid or intervention, for example. The only provision in the agreement that actually stipulates what they would do in this kind of scenario is to seek immediate action from the UN Security Council. Honey, you'll be waiting a long time for that one. So in 2014, Russia violated the deal when it annexed Crimea, and the US, UK, and many other countries said that Russia's move breached the Budapest Memorandum, and they responded by sanctioning Russia and providing financial and military assistance to Ukraine. Even the US back then, under President Obama, gave military assistance, but it was not lethal aid, so it didn't include arms, but things like night vision gear and radar and so on. So the question is, what is the role of this agreement as the Trump administration plays with stopping aid to Ukraine? Could the US end up in violation of the Budapest Memorandum? Listen. You can argue both sides of anything, given how vague this agreement is. I can argue that the military aid supports the assurances the US made in that agreement, but one could also argue that stopping it doesn't necessarily violate the deal. Last week, the Trump administration stopped military aid and some intelligence sharing to get Ukraine to agree to ceasefire talks with Russia. And as of March 12, Ukraine said it supports a 30-day ceasefire. So now the US has resumed the aid and intel sharing. I believe that in order to uphold the spirit of the Budapest Memorandum, the goal of which was to ensure Ukraine's security, given that it was giving up these nuclear weapons, that continuing military assistance is absolutely critical because it puts Ukraine in as strong a position as possible for these negotiations, and ultimately should prevent the kind of aggression the memorandum explicitly prohibited.